One of them is a living fossil, an armored animal that has barely changed in 200 million years, that was already ancient when the dinosaurs showed up, and that has survived two separate mass extinctions. One of them hasn't eaten a single bite of food in 6 months and is slowly burning through a fifth of its own body weight while it waits. And one of them weighs as much as a grown man and launches itself 8 feet straight up into the air over a river packed with families on inner tubes. 3 animals. One question, what do they have in common? They're the same fish. And it's happening in Florida right now. The Suwannee River is one of the last truly wild rivers in America. No dams, no locks, tea-colored water winding 250 miles out of the Okefenokee Swamp and down through North Florida to the Gulf. It's a postcard. People swim it, tube it, water ski it, and run boats up and down it all summer long. And every single summer, as many as 15,000 prehistoric, armored 200-pound fish come home to it and start hurling themselves into the sky. Boaters have been knocked unconscious. People have had bones shattered and faces rebuilt. One family lost a child. And the strangest part of the entire story is that after decades of research, scientists still aren't completely certain why these fish jump at all. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you will never look at a calm Florida river the same way again. But first, let's clear something up, because almost everyone gets this wrong. These fish are not attacking anyone. There's no aggression in this. A Gulf sturgeon has no teeth, none. Its mouth is a soft, protruding tube on the underside of its head, a vacuum built for sucking tiny worms and shellfish off the seafloor. It could not bite you if it wanted to. It isn't hunting, it isn't territorial, and it isn't targeting boats. It doesn't even want to be near you. What's actually happening is far stranger, and in a way, far more unsettling. This is a collision. The fish is doing something it has done in this river for millions of years in the exact spot it has always done it. And we built a highway of boat traffic straight through the middle of it. Nobody is at fault here, which is precisely what makes it so hard to prevent. There's no warning growl, no fin cutting the surface, no way to see it coming. The river is quiet, and then a 200-pound animal is in the air, and physics takes over. So let's talk about what that animal actually is. Meet the Gulf sturgeon. Start with the body, because it explains the damage. A Gulf sturgeon can reach 8 feet long and weigh up to 200 pounds, bigger than most of the people sharing the water with it. But the size is only half of it. Sturgeon don't have ordinary scales, they're armored, wrapped in 5 rows of bony plates called scutes, ridged and hard, running the length of the body like riveted plating. Underneath the snout hang 4 whisker-like barbels it drags along the bottom to taste for food. This design is almost unbelievably old. Sturgeon have been swimming essentially unchanged for around 200 million years. They predate the dinosaurs, they watched the dinosaurs vanish, and they came through 2 mass extinctions without needing to reinvent themselves. Even the tail is a clue to how ancient they are. Like a shark's, the upper lobe is noticeably larger than the lower, an arrangement modern fish largely abandoned. They're long-lived too, commonly reaching their 20s, with one Suwannee fish aged at 42 years, meaning some of the animals in that river have been making the same journey since before many of the people boating past them were born. What's cruising up the Suwannee this summer is not a modern fish. It's a survivor from a completely different world that never found a reason to change. And now, the part that makes the jumping so bizarre. The migration and the fast. Gulf sturgeon live 2 separate lives. In winter, they're out in the Gulf of Mexico, feeding hard on the seafloor, packing on weight. Then, from roughly January through April, they turn and swim home, pushing more than 120 miles up the Suwannee to the same spawning grounds their ancestors used, up near Ellaville where the Withlacoochee comes in. They navigate back to their natal river with astonishing precision, the way salmon do, and then, once they're in the river, they stop eating. Completely. Adult sturgeon spend 8 to 9 months in fresh water and essentially fast the entire time, burning through as much as 20% of their own body mass before returning to the Gulf to feed again. Picture running a marathon that lasts 3/4 of a year on an empty stomach. They aren't starving by accident either. Everything they need was banked out in the Gulf, and the river is purely for reproduction. Unlike salmon, which spawn once and die, a sturgeon does this whole punishing round trip again and again, year after year, for decades. Hold on to that, because it's the single strangest detail in this whole story. A starving fish should be conserving every calorie it has. Instead, at the exact peak of its fast, In the heat of midsummer, it starts launching 200 pounds of itself clean out of the water, over and over again. That is an enormous, almost reckless expenditure of energy, which means it has to matter. So what does a sturgeon jump actually look like? The jump. It isn't a splash, it's a ritual, and researchers who filmed it up close have documented the whole sequence. First, before it ever moves, the fish makes 3 clicks, popping its tongue down from the roof of its mouth, an audible countdown underwater. Then a few hard thrusts of that big shark-like tail, a rush of water, and it breaks the surface. It goes straight up, not at an angle, 7 feet, sometimes 9 feet into the air, a slab of armored muscle completely clear of the river. At the top it twists, wiggles, and turns, then comes down flat with a crash you can hear from hundreds of yards away. And then, underwater, one final click. Sequence complete. Now imagine that happening a few feet in front of a boat traveling 20 miles an hour with someone sitting up on the bow. That's the collision. And the timing is what makes it so dangerous. Jumping runs from roughly May through October, peaking in the heat of midsummer, which is the exact stretch of the calendar when the Suwannee is busiest with holiday weekends, tubers, and skiers. The peak of the fish's strangest behavior lands squarely on the peak of ours. This is where we have to talk about what it does to people. The injury record. Because the numbers are worse than most Floridians realize. When wildlife officials began seriously tracking these strikes, the tally was startling. In 2006 alone, 9 people were injured by direct contact with jumping sturgeon, plus 2 more hurt when their boat hit a bridge piling while swerving to avoid one. The very next year, 9 more were injured, and 1 person drowned after being thrown from a boat that veered away from a leaping fish, and the injuries themselves are brutal in a way that surprises people who think of this as a funny Florida story. Documented cases include boaters knocked unconscious, fractured spines, a collapsed lung, a ruptured spleen, broken ribs, and facial wounds that required reconstructive surgery. 1 victim lost 4 fingers. This is what happens when 200 pounds of bone-plated animal meets a human body at speed. It's less like being hit by a fish and more like being hit by a falling engine block. And in 2015, it turned into something far worse. The night the river changed. On a July evening in 2015, a family from Trenton, Florida, was out on the Suwannee in their boat. A sturgeon came out of the water and into the vessel, striking 3 of them. The mother suffered facial injuries requiring surgery. Her 9-year-old son was hurt as well, and their 5-year-old daughter, Jalen, did not survive. It remains the only recorded death from a sturgeon strike on the Suwannee River, and the family's loss is the reason so many people along that river now take the warning signs at the boat ramp seriously. That year, the water was running unusually low, and the fish were jumping more than they had in seasons. Just a day later, 2 more boaters were struck on the nearby Santa Fe River. That is the hardest part of this story, and it deserves to be said plainly rather than dressed up. It also leads directly to the question that has driven decades of research. If a fasting fish is willing to spend that much energy, and the consequences can be this severe, then why on earth do they do it? The mystery. Here's the honest answer. Scientists have narrowed it down, but they'll tell you themselves it isn't fully closed. 2 explanations lead the field, and they may both be true at once. The first is buoyancy. A sturgeon holds position just above the riverbed, and to hover there effortlessly, it needs the gas in its swim bladder balanced just right. When pressure shifts, a weather front moving through, or the fish changing depth, that bladder expands or shrinks. By breaking the surface, the sturgeon gulps a mouthful of air and tops itself back up so it can hang motionless in the current without wasting energy. For a starving animal, that trade actually makes sense. The second explanation is communication, and it's the more haunting one. Remember those clicks and that thunderous crash? Researchers believe the whole performance is a signal. One veteran biologist who spent his career studying these fish described it perfectly. The sturgeon are calling out to locate each other, like cows in a field, mooing. The jump isn't an accident of energy, it's a voice. A 200-pound animal shouting its position down a dark, tannin-stained river it can barely see through, telling the rest of the herd where the good water is. Over the years, other theories have been floated as well, that jumping sheds parasites, or that it's tied to courtship and spawning. Some have largely fallen out of favor. Others may still play a small part. And that uncertainty is worth sitting with for a second, because it's genuinely humbling. We can map the ocean floor and land machines on Mars, and yet one of the largest, most visible, most heavily studied fish in the American South is doing something enormous and obvious right in front of us every summer, and we still can't say with total confidence why. Which brings us to this year, because in 2026, the Suwannee showed us something new. The summer of the frenzy. This spring, North Florida fell into an exceptional drought. Rainfall ran far below average for months, and parts of the Suwannee dropped to near record low levels, so low that the sturgeon, arriving on schedule from the Gulf, physically could not reach the gravel-bottomed channels upstream where they lay their eggs, so they stacked up. Biologists estimate that somewhere between 100 and 200 sturgeon crowded into a stretch of river spanning less than a single square mile. Shallow, clear water, the exact opposite of the deep, dark, cloudy holes these fish prefer. Trapped, crowded, unable to spawn, and stressed. And then they started jumping like nobody had ever seen. A normal sturgeon might jump once every 2 or 3 days. Observers on the water this spring counted 2 or 3 sturgeon in the air every minute. Think about that gap, from a couple of jumps a week to a couple every 60 seconds. Biologists believe it was the combination of conditions the fish hate, and a spawning drive with nowhere to go, stress pouring out of them in the only language they have. That went on for roughly 8 weeks, until summer storms finally lifted the river and the fish settled and dropped back downstream to their usual deep summer holes. But by the time the water came up, it was too warm for the eggs and larvae to survive, and most of this year's spawning simply failed. It's a stark preview of what a hotter, more drought-prone Florida may mean for a fish that has already outlasted the dinosaurs. And yet, remarkably, the sturgeon's own story right now is a good one. The comeback nobody talks about, because a century ago we very nearly erased them. Gulf sturgeon were slaughtered across their range for meat and above all for their eggs, sold as caviar. Combine that with dams choking off spawning rivers elsewhere in the South, and the species collapsed. Florida gave them state protection in 1984, and in 1991 they were federally listed as threatened. It is now illegal to catch or kill one, and the Suwannee became their stronghold for one simple reason. There are no dams on it. Nothing blocks the road home. Every mile of that river is still open to them, exactly as it was thousands of years ago, which is precisely why up to 15,000 of them now return there, one of the largest and healthiest Gulf sturgeon populations left on Earth. They've even hedged their bets. About a fifth of the Suwannee sturgeon spawn in the fall instead of the spring, a built-in safety valve for disastrous years like this one. A female may release several million eggs across her lifetime, and only 2 need to survive to keep the population stable. Which means every jump you see is, in a strange way, the sound of a species that made it back. And it also means this is going to keep happening every summer, so here's how to stay safe. The rules are simple, and wildlife officers repeat them for a reason. Go slow, because speed is what turns a collision into a catastrophe, and slowing down buys you the split second to react. Stay alert in all directions, and if you see fish jumping, throttle back immediately. Keep passengers off the bow because that is the most exposed seat on the boat. And wear your life jacket every time, because the real danger isn't only the impact, it's being knocked unconscious into the water. The fish concentrate in deep holding areas, spots like the water below Manatee Springs near Rock Bluff around the Old Town Trestle, and below where the Santa Fe meets the Suwannee. And if you're struck, report it so the people tracking this can keep the warnings accurate. So here's where we end up. Every summer, in one of the most beautiful rivers in America, a fish older than the dinosaurs comes home to starve, to spawn, and to shout its location into the dark by throwing its entire armored body at the sky. It isn't a monster. It isn't hunting anyone. It's a survivor of 2 mass extinctions that was nearly wiped out by us in a single century, and then clawed its way back in the one river we never dammed. The collisions aren't an attack. They're what happens when a 200-million-year-old ritual and a 20-mile-an-hour outboard motor try to occupy the same 6 feet of air. The Suwannee isn't a river to be afraid of. It's a river to respect and to pay attention on. So the next time you're gliding down that quiet brown water and someone tells you it's just a lazy Florida river, you'll know exactly what's down there, why it jumps, and why the only smart thing to do is slow down and watch the water.